Hey there nation, and welcome to another edition of Cheap Shots, our series dedicated to showing you how to save money on the wargaming hobby. And on today's episode, we'll show you how to quickly and cheaply paint a Spyrer Hunting Party for your games of Necromunda, Hive, Secundus. We will paint these miniatures to a beautiful tabletop standard, and by using the techniques and the materials that we suggest, we can help you save $137.63. And now, of course, that's assuming you're purchasing things from Citadel as well as Army Painter. With our Cheapskate, totally going to be spending $26.92 in order to achieve the exact same results. And as you can see, these miniatures look absolutely fantastic. I was actually quite inspired by some things like Transformers, for example, as well as like sports motorcycle bikes that are available out there on the streets. I thought the reason why I decided to go with this kind of bright, kind of technicolor kind of design is because, you know, these guys are supposed to be the children of rich nobles who want to, will spend money on their hunting rigs and then try to get designer colors for it or make it look customized and look really cool. So this is the end result that we'll have on your miniatures. So with that being said, let's talk about exactly how we painted these guys up. Now the first thing you do is you're going to spray paint your miniatures with Rust-Oleum silver spray paint. You can get this at your local Walmart for about $3.99, and we're going to spray this entirely over the entirety of the miniature. Now the reason why we're doing this is because we're using glazing in order to paint these miniatures up, and the reason why is because I want to create this colored metallic kind of look for the miniatures, and the best way I know how to do that is by using glazing in order to do that. So by using silver like this as a base coat, when we apply our layers of glaze or different colors on top of the armor, the silver will actually bleed through the different layers of glazing, so it kind of gives like this colored metallic look to it, and that's the reason why we're using the silver and spray painting the entirety of the miniatures. So once we have our miniatures spray paint, the next thing we gotta do, of course, is to paint the undersuits for these Spyrer Hunters. Now the Spyrer Hunters actually wear like these jumpsuits beneath their armor rigging, and in order to create this color to make it look like it kind of stands as a detail, I decided to paint that in 2 thin layers of pavement paint by Apple Barrel Paint. You can get this at your local Walmart for about 50 cents, and we're painting all the undersuit that's located on these miniatures. So around the neck, the arms, the legs, inside the thighs, the back of the legs as well. We're also going to be flipping these miniatures around and also doing the back portions of their armor too. So here's a shot of the back of the fighters as well, so you can see we're actually capturing the things like the pants, the backs, as well as the back of the arms as well. And we're putting 2 thin layers of this pavement paint directly on top of the miniature. Now some of the silver might actually bleed through a little bit with the through the 2 layers of pavement paint, but if it does so, that's perfectly fine. It just looks like it's part of the design element anyway. And as weird as it may sound, we're actually not going to dry brush these parts, and the reason why we're not going to do that is for one very simple reason. This is not actually supposed to be eye-catching at all. It's just a detail that kind of illustrates the gaps between the armor. That's all it really does, and to be perfectly honest, it looks better if it's a completely dark color like this. It kind of clashes nicely with the rest of the different colors we're going to use for the miniatures. And with that, we're going to do our video a little bit differently this time. And the reason why is because we'll be focusing on each Spyrer Hunter individually, because I gave these guys an individualized paint job. So the very first one we're going to actually work on is my Hunt Leader. As you can see, I decided to pick this out in 3 glaze layers of bright magenta. Now to glaze your miniature, it's really simple. All you got to do is just take your color paint that you want to use as a glaze, you add water to it and mix it together. About a 50-50 mix on it, do it. You basically want the water to be very runny, the paint really runny, and also very liquidy as well. Now unfortunately, the problem with glazing miniatures is that it takes a while for it to dry, because you got to put multiple layers of glaze on directly onto your miniatures. So what you got to do, of course, is to paint all the parts that you want to be pink in this situation by Apple Barrel Paint. And I had to put 3 layers on top of this. The very first layer is very translucent, the second layer not so much, and the third layer is the final detail on this. And as you can see, some of that silver is kind of poking through the pink that we put directly onto the armor, so that way it kind of creates this metallic look to it, and that's exactly what we were looking for. So now that we have the pink portions of the armor paneling taken care of, we're going to start working on some of the finer details. So for example, along the legs of the characters wearing, as well as the arms, they have these straps to kind of strap their armor directly to their body. So in order to paint those leather straps, we're going to actually paint this out in glaze these layers with 3 layers of Anita's acrylic Moroccan brown. You can get this moccasin brown color at your local Walmart Hobby Lobby for about 65 cents. I just did 3 layers of glazing directly onto the leather strips. The reason why I decided to do that is because I also want to make it look like that the leather strips might not be actually made out of leather, that they might actually make a special kind of metal that kind of keep it attached to the body. And so I decided to do that real quick with some glazing real fast, and then we're ready to move on to our next fine detail. So the next fine details we're working on, of course, are on the yellow portions of this armor. So things like the kneecaps, for example, the gauntlet with the Malcadon claws, as well as the laser gauntlet, from the yield, as well as the helmet as well. We put those on three thin glazing layers of King's Gold, once again making our glaze mixture and putting it directly onto the metallic elements to kind of create this kind of metallic looking yellow color as well. And if you also notice too, the head on the Spyrer Hunter looks different because I actually took it from one of the Tech Hunters from the Vansar box set. I just didn't like the way that some of those Spyrer heads looked. I thought they looked kind of goofy. I like the way that the Tech Hunter heads look instead. They look actually more insectile and more alien, and I thought they looked really cool as well. So once we put our 3 layers of glaze directly on the yellow that's dried up, the next thing we gotta do is now work on our fine details. Alright, so now we're going to work on the fine details once again using our glaze in order to do this. Now the first thing we're going to do, we're going to neaten up our details by using 2 thin coats of Folk Arts Anniversary Silver. It's a nice bright silver color that also blends really nicely with the spray paint that we used earlier. And the reason why that's the case, because in case you do spill any glaze directly onto a part of the armor that you don't want to be that color, you just neaten up with some silver paint, and then of course you just apply the glaze at a different color to create the exact same effect. Now in this situation, I decided to focus on the energy cells on the backpack as well as on the weapons that this character is carrying. I decided to put down 3 glazing layers of Mystic Turquoise by Folk Art. You get this to look warm for about 75 cents. It's a nice dark teal color, and it also looks really awesome when you put it on the silver like this to create this metallic color. So as you can see, I brought those details out. I then did exactly the same thing with Apple Barrel's Crisp Green. Now for that color, I didn't actually glaze on that one. I actually just used the paint normally, and I put that directly onto the eye lenses on the Tech Hunter's mask. So that way it looks like those eyes are popping out and kind of look like their own little individualized detail. And that part I didn't glaze, I just used normal layers of paint in order to create that detail. And if you look right here in the Vansar mask, also from the mouth part where the respirator is located at, I painted that in 2 thin layers of Anniversary Silver, so that way it creates that distinction between the rest of the armor. If we flip the remote to the back side, you can see where most of my detail was done with the turquoise on the power cells as well as the power cabling that's going on in the back of the character, and same thing using that crisp apple green directly onto the power cell that powers the entire suit as well. As you can see, I also use that Anniversary Silver color in order to neat out the details from the back, things like the little harness around the power cell and the small of the back, as well as the pistons in the back of the legs as well. The last bit of color that you use, of course, are metallic colors. I decided to use Deco Arts Emperor's Gold. You can get this at your local Walmart for about 65 cents, and I use that directly for things like the buckles on the harnesses that are located at the legs as well. I also use Folk Arts Copper. You can get this at your local Walmart for about 75 cents. I use that to pick up the detail of the chest emblem on the center of the chest as well, and then I, of course, rim the outside of that chest emblem with a thin layer of Anniversary Silver as well to make that detail really pop. Same thing with some of the little rivets that are on the armor as well as some of the joints as well. Picked out those really fine details like on the little power cabling on the shoulders, and then this miniature is pretty much done with. The next miniature I decided to focus on was on the Jakara miniature as well. I decided to go with like a purple as well as an orange kind of color. And the reason why I decided to go with those 2 colors is because I was painting these miniatures on the week where Halloween was happening, and I thought it looked really kind of cool to use those Halloween colors, and that's exactly what I did. So once again, I used 3 layers of glazing of ripe tomato for all the orange, so things like the chest, the shoulders, the hands, as well as the thighs, as well as the legs. Put 3 layers of that glaze directly onto that silver metallic color to create that kind of metallic orange look. And then I used the Concord Grit by Apple Barrel paint and used that to glaze the things like the helmet, for example, the weapon harnesses for the mirror shield, as well as for the monomolecular blade, as well as the kneecaps, as well as the helmet, as well as the abdomen portion of the miniature. And I just picked those details out of 3 thin layers of glaze for those colors, and once those dry, we can start moving on to the finer details. And the finer details I actually worked on these guys are things like the power cabling along the shoulder. I picked out 3 thin glaze layers of Crisp Apple by Apple Barrel paint. You get this to look more for about 50 cents along the power cabling along the shoulders as well as the back. And then I used 3 layers of glaze for Folk Arts Mystic Turquoise for the blades of the monomolecular blade as well as the mirror shield. I decided to do that because I want to make it look like those energy weapons are actually kind of otherworldly and not really made out of normal metal that's used in normal weaponry. And it kind of contrasts nicely with the purple as well as the orange that we put on the Jakara's armor. Here is the back side of the miniature as well, so that we can see those same details. As you can see, that turquoise looks amazing on the mirror shield as well as on the monomolecular blade. I also used the crisp apple green for the power cells as well as some of the cabling that was going on the shoulders there and the back of the power armor, as well as some of the power cabling on the gauntlets where the sword as well as the mirror shield are located at. The last few colors, of course, is Deco Arts Emperor's Gold, which I used in order to paint up the chest rigging, as well as some of the minor details, like along the energy shield, for example, for the for the mirror shield. There's some metallic elements. I picked those out in Emperor's Gold to make it look like it contrasts nicely with the turquoise that we used earlier. And of course, once again, for the chest rig that's on the fighter as well, the chest emblem, I decided to pick down 2 thin layers of Folk Arts Copper on that as well. And that Jakara miniature is now ready to go for some oil washing. And the next miniature we started to work on next is on the Yill. That's the guy who's flying around as well. And once again, the color we're using for his armor for most of it, especially the rigging on the wings, as well as for most of the body armor, as well as Mystic Turquoise by Folk Art. Once again, getting this at your local Walmart for about 75 cents. We put three layers of glaze directly onto those armor panels that we want to be turquoise color to kind of give that kind of bright blue metallic look that looks really awesome on this miniature. And here's the back side of the miniature as well, so that way you can see the detailing that I did on the wings, on the pinions on the wings, as well as the back harness, as well as the back of the legs. It looks absolutely fantastic. The next layer we worked on, of course, are the leather harnesses around the legs, around the thigh area as well. So once again, I put 3 layers of glaze with moccasin brown to bring out that detail, so that way you can see that the armor is strapped on directly onto the body of the fighter. And once again, I decided to use some metallic silver, once again using anniversary silver from Folk Art in order to do some touch-ups, some base coats directly onto the arms. So for example, on the wings, the pistons on the wings, I painted that out in order to, in case I spilled over with any turquoise color. Same thing the mask, as well as the gauntlets this character is wearing, as well as some of the body armor, primarily along the power tubing, the tubing of power cables along the shoulders of the character. I also did exactly the same thing with the pistons on the back of the leg as well, getting rid of any colors where the turquoise might have spilled over into areas I don't want it to be at. So the next color we use for our glazing, for example, is once again King's Yellow, and we're using this as a nice contrasting color to all the armor that we did in turquoise earlier. So things like the chest rig, for example, the kneecaps, the actual gauntlets of the forearms, as well as the wrists and hands of the fighter. But most of the yellow actually went on the wings themselves, where the individual blades of the wings are located at. I put 3 layers of King's Gold and glazing on that, in order to create that nice metallic yellow color that contrasts nicely with the turquoise that we put on earlier. And the next color we're going to use for the gauntlet as well as the helmet is Diva Pink. I decided to experiment with this color because I used Bright Magenta the first time around. I thought it was a little too pale pink in my opinion. I wanted something that was more neon looking pink. So I decided to use Diva Pink to do that, and boy was I correct. It actually contrasts extremely well against the armor. I put this directly on the head of the helmet of the Spyrer fighter, as well as the scopes, as well as the barrels of the laser gauntlets on the wrist as well. I put 3 thin layers of glaze directly onto those, and once those are dry, we can start moving on to our finer details with the metallic colors. So the colors I use actually for some of the touch-ups, once again, I use anniversary silver to touch up the miniatures, things like any colors where the yellow or the pink might have spilt over, like the barrels of the guns, for example, the lenses of the scopes on those laser gauntlets, the eyes on the helmet, for example. I also use Emperor's Gold as well in order to pick out the chest rig for the fighter, so that way we can see that detail. And I also use the Anita's acrylic antique copper for some of the rivets that are going on along the wings, as well as some of the pistons on the wings, as well as some of the joints on the armor panels and stuff like that to bring out those details, that way you can see those. Here's a side profile of the fighter, so that way you can see exactly what I'm talking about. You can see like the little individual power cables, power coils along the blades of the wings, as well as some of the rivets going on along the actuators on the wings as well. You can also see where I use anniversary silver on the pistons on the back of the legs too. And once again, here's some more detail at the back. As you can see, I did things like pick out the colors of the power cabling on the armor. Same thing with the power cells on the armor as well, and then just pick those out in some anniversary silver to pretty much just neaten them up. And the last color we use on these miniatures, of course, is Crisp Apple Green by Apple Barrel Paint. We use glazing this time around for the power cabling on the shoulders of the rig, as well as on the lenses of the gun laser gauntlets on the wrists. And we also did exactly the same thing on the eyes on the helmet that we're looking at. And on the back of the miniature as well, he picked out the Apple Barrel Green for some of the cabling going from the wrists, from the ribs directly to the back, as well as some of the power cabling on the back of the spine, as well as the power cell right there directly in the middle of the spine as well. And once those colors are done, we're ready to move on to our next fighter, which is our Malkadon. So the very last fighter we're going to work on is on the Malkadon, which is the Spider-Man looking guy. We decided to pick those in 3 thin layers of glaze for Crisp Apple Green for pretty much the entirety of the miniature as well. Now, if you're wondering why I painted this guy primarily green all over the armor painting, it's for one very simple reason. The thing was, I basically became a little impatient, and I thought this whole glazing process was a little tedious, and so instead of doing 2 different multiple colors on this guy, I decided to be lazy and to paint him all green is what I decided to do. I'm not going to make any excuses. I just got tired of painting all the different colors on the different Spyres, and for this guy I decided I just want to get this guy done, so I kind of rushed the project a little bit. So, you know, I'm a human being, you know, I'm used to that kind of stuff. Well, anyways, the reason why I went with this green color from Apple Barrel is because I was inspired by an old PlayStation 3 video game called Brink. Brink was a very short-lived multiplayer game that takes place in a post-apocalyptic environment. Well, anyways, one of the characters in that game is called Bug. The Bug is what he's called, and he has this bright green armor, and he was basically uses parkour to climb around the battlefield. I thought it was a really cool-looking design from that video game from years ago. So all my OGs who played Brink, you know, put comments down below. So I decided to actually paint up this miniature to make it look exactly like that. And that's exactly what I decided to do. So I did 3 thin layers of crisp apple green all over the entirety of the miniature. So once again, I decided to touch up with some of the details on this miniature as well, where areas where the green might have spilt over. I used 2 thin coats of anniversary silver, so things like along the gloves, for example, where the blades are, the actual armor joints and panels of the chest rig, so the power cabling on the shoulders, the little spindles that are next to the gauntlets as well. And I did exactly the same thing on the back of the character as well. Things like the pistons on the legs, for example, the power cells on the back rigging, as well as some of the cabling that's there. And once you get done picking out those details, we can start moving in with some more finer detail colors. Alright, so some of the finer details I worked on are things like the straps along the thighs. Once again, I did 3 layers of glazing using the moccasin brown to bring out that look, to make it look like it might be kind of metal or it might be leather. You really don't know. At the same time, I also decided to pick out some of the details along the guns of the little web shooters that are located on the arms as well. For those details, I picked those out in some thin layers of some ripe tomato, and then of course I also did the lenses of the helmet as well, picking out those 2 thin dots of Anita's red acrylic, True Red. You can get this at your local Walmart for about 65 cents. And on this photo, I do have to apologize. I actually used the wrong color in this photo. We'll talk about that here in a second. So, for some of the metallic elements, like things like the canisters for the ammunition for the web spinners, for example, as well as some of the joints that are going on throughout the rest of the armor, I use Anita's acrylic aged copper in order to get those colors across. You can get that at your local Walmart for about 65 cents. I also use Emperor's Gold for some of the things like the buckles on the belts, as well as some of the different metallic elements on the gauntlets, as well as on the chest emblem as well. Now, if you notice, I have Folk Arts Mystic Turquoise. I do apologize for this. The color that should be back there should not be that color. It should be copper by Folk Art. I do apologize for that mix-up. The reason why I talk about this is because I use the copper color for things like the barrels of the guns, for example, the power tubing that's along the shoulders, as well as the back of the armor, as well as along the ribs as well. And now that most of these miniatures are done, the next thing we do, of course, is to work on the bases. Now in this case, we're just going to use normal base coating with the Folk Arts matte finish with its Mystic Turquoise. We put 2 thin layers directly onto the bases. And as you can see, even if we don't water down the paint, we just use normal paint, regular craft paint, you can still see that little bit of that metallic kind of peeking through it as well, to kind of give you that metallic armor type of thing. Now, if you notice, it's a much darker turquoise as opposed to like the Yeld fighter to the left-hand side there. So you can see what happens when you glaze down your paint with some water, as opposed to just putting it directly onto the just normally. If I just painted these miniatures up normally, not using the glaze technique, the armor would have looked much darker and it would not have looked as vibrant in terms of like the metallic elements designed on it. Now, when I was painting these miniatures, I started working on the base, but I realized I forgot to put the oil wash on my miniatures, so because of that, I did kind of make a mistake a little bit here, but that's okay though, because mistakes are part of life, and I'm going to report to you guys honestly, just like how I paint these miniatures up. So I stopped working on the base because I realized I forgot to put oil wash on the armor of the miniatures, and so because I use mid-wax polysheet acrylic in Mission Oak in order to do that. Now, most people like to use Army Painter Strong Tone, which is a perfectly fine product. It does exactly what it has advertised. The only problem is though that Army Painter Strong Tone costs $32 a can, whereas mid-wax polysheet acrylic in Mission Oak only costs $6.99. So what I decided to do is use that Mission Oak, and I painted it like a wash directly all over the entirety of the miniatures. As you see, it did a couple of things. The first thing it did, of course, it brings out a lot of the details that we couldn't see earlier, like the gaps in the armor, the texturing of the armor panels, as well as the clothing these guys are wearing. It brings out those details. And the second thing it does too is also darkens down the value of the colors that we use on these miniatures as well. And that's actually kind of nice because it makes it look a little bit more grimy, like it's been weathered a little bit, like these guys have been down in the wastes of the Underhive doing some fighting. Now, you'll need to wait for this stuff to dry and cure for 24 hours, and that's exactly what we're going to do. When it does dry, it's going to have a nice bright high gloss sheen because there is polyurethane in the mix, so it will protect your miniature from fading as well as from being chipped, which is quite nice, but you do have to wait for that stuff to dry and cure for 24 hours. So after they dried, the next thing I did, of course, is I decided to touch up the bases real quick with another layer of Mystic Turquoise, and then of course I dry brush the miniatures with Dutch Aqua by Folk Art. I go directly onto the bases, and the reason why that's the case is because I want to create this kind of neon glowing kind of effect on the bases to make these guys look like, you know, a little bit more high speed than average people. So because I decided to do that real quick, just put a quick dry brushing for the Dutch Aqua to bring a lot of those details that we couldn't see earlier. The very last dry brush that we do on the bases, of course, is once again using Anniversary Silver by Folk Art to kind of create this kind of scratch and weather kind of surface on the bases. We just do a quick dusting real quick directly onto the bases to bring out those details. And next thing we guys do now is start bringing out the colors in the recesses to make this have this neon glowing effect. So to create that neon glow, I decided to use 2 coats of Folk Arts Neon Black Light Neon Blue. As you can see, I just put that directly into the recesses in the miniature as well. So things like the vents, for example, the decking that's taking place between the elevated surfaces around the skull emblem. I just put 2 thin layers on that to kind of create this kind of glowing neon look on the bases. It looks really nice and it contrasts nicely with these miniatures and looks very fitting for them. And the second to last step, of course, is to rim the miniatures. So we rim the bases of the miniatures with some layers, 2 thin layers of Skyline by Folk Art. It's a nice grayish bluish color that I use for all the Necromunda miniatures in the studio's collection, as well as for a lot of the skirmish miniatures, like Mordheim, for example. I put 2 thin layers on that, and these miniatures are pretty much done. This last step, of course, is completely optional, but if you want to have a matte finish for your miniatures, you can buy a can of Krylon matte varnish spray. You can get this at your local Walmart for about $5.99. I don't really care for that high gloss sheen, so I just spray these guys to give the once over real quick of that matte varnish, and it'll create a matte finish for these miniatures as well. But if you don't like that look, you can totally skip this step, and of course, this will be the end result for your miniature. As you can see, these guys look beautiful to a beautiful tabletop standard, look really high speed, brightly colorful, really customized, and I can't wait to see exactly how these guys operate on the tabletop. So now that we're done painting up these miniatures using our Cheapskate method, let's talk about exactly what you'll need to purchase from both Army Painter and Citadel if you want to achieve the exact same results we did, but using name brand paints instead. So these are the materials that you need to buy from both Army Painter and Citadel if you want to paint exactly the same way we did. You'll need to buy a can of Lead Pelter Spray, which would cost you $24, as well as Emperor's Children, Averland Sunset, Gene Sealer Purple, Screamer Pink, Hellion Pink, Eshin Gray, Troll Slayer Orange, Mephiston Red, XV88, and all those colors would cost you $4.55 a piece. You also need to buy Brass Scorpion, Screaming Bell, as well as Ironbreaker, which costs you $7.80 for those colors, Rust Gray, which costs us $4.55, Aethermatic Blue, which costs us $7.80, Thunderhawk Blue, which costs us another $4.55, as well as Retribution Armor, which costs $7.80 on top of that. You also need to buy some Aimer Pioneer Strong Toe, which is going to cost you $32 for that pot, as well as for a can of Mutatorian Varnish if you want to do a matte varnish spray for miniatures, which costs you $19.50. Now, assuming that you're purchasing everything for the very first time from Citadel and Army Painter, you're talking about a grand total investment of $164.55 in order to paint your miniatures to the standard that we did, but using those name brand paints. Now, when you compare that to the Cheapskate total of $26.92, we end up with a grand total savings of $137.63. So there you guys have it. If you're strapped for cash, may I suggest switching your miniatures painting from the name brand paints to the cheap craft paints. They achieve very similar results at a very small fraction of the price as well. You can save a ton of money doing this as well. Painting up your miniatures and cheap craft paints is the fastest and easiest way I know to help you to save money on the wargaming hobby, especially if you're really into painting your miniatures. And as you can see, I'm not the best miniature painter in the world, but my miniatures actually look pretty nice considering I'm using craft paints in order to do so. So with that being said, you guys, that's good news from you guys. As always, please feel free to like, comment, and or subscribe. Your guys' input is valuable to us as always. Also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, as well as blogger.com for all those greatest hobby news related to this channel. That's good for this week, guys. I'll catch you guys next one. Peace out and stay classy.